It's your boy Beats by Ash, back at it again with a long overdue banger, and today we are going to be revisiting one of my favorite strategies of all time, Green Kid, specifically the 8-drop Wall Kid variant, and I think that this deck is very well positioned to beat the meta, and that's why I wanted to share it with you guys. I know that this is nothing new, but as a person who doesn't always like to play meta and I'm not able to go to a lot of events during this season, I hope that someone else is able to at least take my idea and maybe expand on it and hopefully do well at an event, because I do think that this strategy has some merit in countering the meta. Now, a lot of people have made claims that this deck isn't really good because you auto lose to yellow and you auto lose to Whitebeard. And personally, I do not think that that is the case. Now, previously, I took this deck to a X2 finish in a regional in set 2, placing top 32. And I think that the strategy is very similar to what it did in set 2, but I think some of the weaknesses have been taken away. You do not get to go with your traditional strategy of walling up against the Whitebeard matchup or the yellow matchup. We do have one advantage going for us: the limiting of 9-cost Edward Newgate. Previously, this was a very risky strategy to take because when you played your 8-drop Kid on turn 4, if you're on the draw, your opponent could then respond on turn 5 with a 9-cost Newgate, essentially mitigating all of your tempo and providing an answer to your Kid with a minimal Dawn investment while also removing a blocker. Since there is only one of those available to be played in a deck, I think that this makes this strategy actually quite a bit less risky, and since the deck is very consistent, I feel very comfortable telling people that this is a viable strategy in the meta, because in set 2, the reason I was able to have so much success with this, the way I built the deck, it's very well positioned to hard counter Red Zoro and Red Green Law. And in the Red Zoro matchup or Red Luffy matchup last set, the only thing that could stop us from just steamrolling our opponent is if they chain back-to-back Newgates, and even then, oftentimes I was able to push through that. While the new 5-cost Marco is irritating to play for board, I think that our strategy just overwhelmingly counters that strategy, and so that's why I think this has a lot of viability. A lot of people have this misconception that you automatically lose to yellow. Well, in my experience, I just try to be as aggro as possible, which is the opposite of the traditional strategy that we want to go with in other matchups, and it works out pretty well because eventually you get to a point where you're double attacking with your leader for 12, and a lot of the times that can close out the game. And also, I think one thing that people seem to miss is instead of playing the 8-drop Kid on the board, I never play it, which a lot of times makes the other guy not want to play his 8-cost Katakuri because he's waiting for me to play my 8-cost Kid. And if he does, then I put down my 8-cost Kid. If I already have blockers established, hard punish him, or I just don't play it at all. He doesn't play his big drop at all, and then I just try to flood the board with 5-drop blocker laws and try to generate infinite value with my Bonnie. Since our deck does have quite a few blockers and yellow's weakness is blockers, I think it works very well against that strategy, especially if the other person doesn't expect the way that I'm going to play against them. I would say that I have at least a 55 to 60% win rate versus yellow in general with this strategy, and that's one of the only hard weaknesses to this deck. And similarly in the Whitebeard matchup, I play the exact same way. And I think that that strategy of just trying to rush down the Whitebeard leader, which is what I did in set 2, and I beat 3 Whitebeard players in the regional on this build when they had 4 Rad Beam and they had 4 blocker Marco. Well, now they only have 1 blocker Marco and they only have 1 Rad Beam. So it makes it to where whenever I'm double attacking for 12, it's a lot less likely that the other guy is going to be able to mitigate my attack, which oftentimes ends me in a position to where I have confirmed lethal. And I really like that about this deck. And I think that if you bring this to a tournament and a lot of people are not expecting it, then you can have quite a bit of success with it, especially if you go against a bunch of Zoros or a bunch of Laws. And if you go against the rogue matchups such as like blue or black, I feel like you auto win versus blue and you have a very strong chance to beat black. So I really like this deck all around. and this does not necessarily suffer from one of the weaknesses that I think some of the other decks in the meta suffer from, which is being reliant on the die roll. In this deck, I would prefer to go second because I'm going to try to be more reactive to my opponent, but ultimately, it doesn't change what I'm able to do because my curve is just going to delay me playing my 8-drop for one more turn. But honestly, there are some times when you can't even play 8-drop on turn 4 because you need to play for board. So that doesn't even always come up, and I really like that about this strategy, especially in those key matchups such as the Zoro and the Law. But we're going to quickly take a look over the deck. I'm going to try to be as fast as possible for the people who have seen this 1,000 times because I hate to be repetitive. So some of the cards that are in this deck, actually quite a few cards in this deck are staple, and you're going to see them in every Green Kid deck. You know, you have your 12 Supernova blockers, and we have our 2 Cat Viper. I think that this is honestly necessary because the 4,000 stat line is very important. It can be killed by your opponent's Marco, and I think in order to justify playing for Momonosuke, we need to have a defensive option that is searchable via our Momonosuke, and that's really nice about this deck because both of our searchers are going to be like 90% chance or above to hit, and you can easily cycle through the entire deck multiple times, only comparable to the red-green Law strategy, which almost guarantees you to get to the cards you want to see in each matchup. One of those key cards being the Yamato. Ultimately, if you're new to this strategy, our game plan is to set up our kid, not actually swing with anything until we also access the Yamato, and once you have an 8-drop plus 2 blockers on the board and a Yamato, and your opponent is drained of resources, now we can just start swinging with our double attack banish, and because our opponent is so low on resources, it's pretty much just an auto loss for them. Now, the only actual new addition to the deck has to be 2 copies of Creed. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this is correct. It's more of a meta call, but this at least indicates you the 2 flex spots. But I think that the fact this doesn't have a counter is not really a disadvantage in Green Kid since I can discard it. The only thing that sucks is I feel like I just don't see this card enough because it is non-searchable, but the double attack ability does actually come up whenever you're trying to close out the game, so it almost fits a similar role to Yamato, especially when you're going second. And I think that this card actually helps out quite a bit in the yellow and Whitebeard matchups. Whenever they're putting out 4-cost 6Ks, then you're just able to trade away 1 card to kill that while developing your own threat. So even if you kill 1 card, it just feels like a huge tempo swing, which is what you need to do in that matchup. I would say the only other card that's like kind of meta dependent is this 4-Punk Gibson, and I think this is really helping us out because in the Zoro and the red-green Law matchup, Punk Gibson is honestly crazy. You're able to rest characters that you would normally have to waste a resource on while also mitigating a damage, essentially creating a 2-for-1 in your favor, and I think that's just really nice right now. Also, I think Raizo is a really good card right now. What's really good about Raizo is that a lot of times, because the game is so weenie centered right now, you don't have to invest a Dawn on this card, so then he's trading away a resource while also generating you a card, which is sometimes a +2 in card advantage because they're going to have to trade it away on the next turn. And when you don't have access to your value engines, i.e. your Bonnie and your Momo, it's very important to have a 3rd value engine, and that's why I feel like there's really no room for Okiku right now, but potentially maybe Krieg could be Okiku. We'll just have to see how the meta develops because Okiku is a very good card to rest your opponent's Marco in order to double attack it and cause your opponent to just waste like a lot of events, and once they have no events, then you're just clearing board and just winning the game, which is ultimately our game plan. But I think I've talked enough about the build. In order to demonstrate that this deck does not have an unwinnable matchup versus Whitebeard or Yellow, I wanted to show you guys a couple games against Whitebeard to see how we would play differently, since most people understand the general Green Kid game plan in majority of matchups. Shout out to Ben D once again for doing some games with us, and let's get into the games. So our opponent is going to be going second here. What I'm looking for is to have some blocker laws, and the Yamato is fine here, but I don't know if I necessarily want to have that because if you play it on curve and you hit with it, it's really good value because you're getting his life before he gets them, but it's kind of risky with our hand because we don't have a lot of blockers, which is what we optimally want. So we're going to go ahead and mulligan this. So this hand is actually quite a bit better. We do have the Trafalgar Law, and we have 3 value engines. This is extremely optimal hand. I think here, I'm just going to go ahead and drop down our Kazuki Momonosuke, just so we have something to tap if we get to attack with our Raizo. Since we're going first, I'm not going to be able to Bonnie effect and bounce it with Law on turn 3. I'll have to wait till turn 4, so there's no reason for us to risk our Bonnie getting hit with a Vista. So our opponent didn't open up a Searcher, so that's really good for us because he can't contest our Searcher. So here I'm actually just going to forego playing out our Raizo so that I can attach 1 Dawn to our leader and start attacking immediately, because next turn we'll be able to use our Law to bounce back our Momo and summon out our Raizo anyway, since we won't have enough Dawn to attack with it for at least 2 turns. Our opponent's going to go ahead and use a 1K, and we're going to go ahead and drop down a blocker, which is really good for us. Getting down these early blockers is really good, especially since he's going second, because he won't be able to put down his Marco. So our opponent's going to go ahead and hit us for 8 here. I think I'm going to go ahead and take this one. You have to be very particular about when to take life in this matchup, because he can hit for such high numbers in the late game, and his Marco can get rid of our blockers. We do draw the Krieg, which is a really good card if our opponent puts out the 4-cost 6K vanilla. Here, I think I'm just going to forgo attacking and drop down our Law, bouncing our Momo to go ahead and put out the Raizo, which is a really good exchange of value. I think Trafalgar Law will always be one of the most powerful cards in the meta, unless we see a rampant amount of power creep. And the 6K is really relevant in this matchup because we're going to be able to attack without attaching any Dawn every single turn. And as some of you may know, against Whitebeard, most of the time you would prefer to just hit for 6, because the Whitebeard player plays so many 2Ks that it's usually not worth it attaching additional Dawn. He's going to go ahead and attack us for 6 here. I'm not sure if we want to take this. I'm thinking that we can, just because we have 2 blockers already present. But if we decide not to, then we're leaving ourselves susceptible to taking more damage later in the game. And I think since it's very likely he throws down a Thatch, I'm going to go ahead and use the Ezo here. I think actually, because he can't ace, I was wrong. I think we actually go ahead and use our Law blocker and then just discard the Momo, because Momo isn't that relevant for searching purposes in this matchup. And 2Ks do come up very often versus Whitebeard, since his attack demands so many cards from us. And he does have the Otama Marco for our value engine, which is actually pretty good for him. Luckily, we do have access to a second Law blocker, which is very optimal for our current curve. This is where the deck gets very complicated. If you mess up one time, I think it can be very difficult to win, but if you play perfectly, I think it's a very rewarding deck. So next turn, he's probably going to play down an ace, and so I don't necessarily want to attack with my Law, because during this stage of the game, it's very important to be developing the board. So I think actually we're going to forego attacking with our leader and our Law in order to just get a Searcher off of our Bonnie, and hopefully we find a blocker. Okay, and we do end up finding another killer, which is really good for us, because even if we don't want to attach a Dawn to it, it is a card that if we decide to keep it in hand, it has a counter. But I'm thinking here, we're just going to go ahead and play down the Law to get the most value. So we're going to go ahead and bounce back our Bonnie back to hand, putting down that blocker, and this is looking very good for us. Whitebeard is a very board-centric deck, and that's why the blocker Law is very integral. Since we already have a pretty established board, I think next turn, it's very likely we're going to be able to start attacking. Now, we haven't done a damage to our opponent, but I would like to try to do that next turn, because if we don't, he can drop down a Newgate and stabilize it 2 for an additional turn, which is really good for him because that answers one of our blockers and confirms we will not be able to play down the 8-drop Kid. Since we're at 4 life, I think I'm going to go ahead and take this one because we want to save our counter in order to protect our characters. So we end up getting another Momo. This is one I don't care too much for. 3 is a very interesting life total to be at against Edward Newgate, since he does have the King Do. Him having 2 5-drops really sucks because we aren't able to use our Krieg. I'm thinking next turn we probably want to attack his Marco as many times as possible, and we could probably discard this 8-cost Kid. I feel like here we probably want the card once again, just because we already have such a developed board. And I want to save my blockers for whenever he's on the crackback and tries to answer our laws that we're going to be attacking with. With our current board here, we can do two things. We could drop down the Eustace Kid with 4 blockers, which is really good, but at the same time, I really want to challenge his Marco here to stop him from getting so many cards. And I feel like since the deck has 3 less Rad Beam, it's a lot more relevant to be attacking the Marco at this stage of the game, because it's less likely he's willing to discard his events, since those will be very important when we're double attacking his leader if he does not have a blocker. Now, if we do drop down the Kid and he has the Newgate, it is going to be very troublesome for us, but considering he hasn't seen any of his searchers, I think it's a decent chance that he doesn't have the Newgate, and the 8-drop Kid would be very strong here. Considering I have 2 chump blockers, I think it's safe for us to just go ahead and attach 1 to our leader and just swing at his Marco. Getting a defensive event out of his hand is going to be very important here for us pushing for big numbers in the late game. So our opponent's going to go ahead and discard the guard point. That's actually pretty good for us. Now we could re-attack, but I still think it's better just to drop down the 8-drop and just pass back, because we can take 2 damage from his characters and then we can just block the last attack with our chum blocker killer. Because if we were to use our laws to attack his Marco and he did have the ace, we would be incredibly punished. Ace is typically a card that is very painful for us because he can mitigate our 8-cost Kid being a redirect, and we're going to be using 2 chump blockers no matter what. And he does end up having the 9-cost Newgate, which is really bad. But he is going to swing with his characters, which is going to give us a couple of characters that we can challenge next turn. I really want to use both of my killers just because I'm going to be playing my Bonnie and finding a blocker anyway. I'll go ahead and take the first hit because he's going to be attacking with 2 more. This is the one where we want to use a killer so we can create space on the board. Now this 8K, I'm honestly inclined to take this and go to 0 because we have the 8-drop, and since we have 2 laws, these can be used to force out his Edward Newgate attack, causing him to invest a lot of Dawn. So we do draw the Punk Gibson. This is going to be really important next turn from stopping him for pushing through our 8-drop if he doesn't have an ace. We're always attaching 1 to our Kid because we need to have this in order to defend our health total. Killing his King Do is going to be very important. We're not guaranteed to get rid of his Marco, so I don't know if I'm going to be too worried about that. But we do want to play down another killer and hold up 2 for our Punk Gibson. So we're setting aside 4. That means we have 5 left to play with. I think I'm going to go ahead and put my Kid to 11 and threaten his King Do. Now this is going to be demanding a minimum of 3 cards from him, which is going to be really good exchange of value for us. And he's going to go ahead and let it die, which is really good for us. I didn't want to have to re-attack with my leader here because that's going to cost us too much Dawn to get him up to par with his stat line. I think the best thing to do would be to attach 1 to our Kid. That way we can restand. This is going to demand a minimum of 1 card out of his hand. Now we don't necessarily need to protect this. We could let this die and make a huge push for game next turn, depending on how much Dawn he's willing to leave up. If he plays down the ace, we're definitely going to let this die and just use our chump blockers and try to push for lethal next turn. I don't know if we hold up the Punk Gibson, considering that we could get another card out of his hand right now, which gives us a better chance of going for lethal. And we're going to have 2 chump blockers, so even though he's killing 1, if we can't attach 1 Dawn to both of our killers here, we're not going to be stopping him from popping it with a Newgate, and he could always have a Marco or a Vista to mitigate that draw power anyway. Plus, I don't really think that the draw power is coming into play anyway, considering we need to end the game next turn. I think I'm just going to go ahead and use the effect, discarding our Krieg, as it hasn't seen its position in the game to be played, and I don't think we're playing at this point. I think here it's completely fine for us to just go ahead and attach an additional 1 to leader, since he's always going to be killing one of our killers anyway with his Newgate, and we can't attach a Dawn to both. Hopefully this gets a 2k counter out of his hand. Okay, and he's going to give us a Sanji. He's now down to 6 cards, which is looking fairly decent for us. I would say we have a fair chance to go for game next turn. So we play down our killer. If he puts down ace, he's going to have 4 attacks. I think we don't attack with these just because if he has an ace, he's guaranteed to kill this. And I think we're going to need these to go for game next turn. So we'll just go ahead and pass. I think this one's going to come down to the wire. Now, if he didn't have the Newgate, I think we would definitely have a really strong chance of going for game. But because he did have that, it's going to put a lot of pressure on us. And he does have the ace. So I am glad that we didn't use our Trafalgar Law to attack because it would be confirmed to die. He's going to have 4 attacks here. He can make his Marco 7, and then he can make his Newgate 8. He's going to go 7 on 5. I think here we will go ahead and use our 2K. Considering he can't put out a blocker other than a Fossa, I think it's fine for us to use 3K counter out of our hand, because at this point, we are going to be going for game next turn regardless, and we can always use the Ezo to tap his blocker if we need to do so. I think this is guaranteeing us that he's not going to be able to go for game, because now we can just chump block with one of our killers here. He's going to attack for 6, and now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and use the 2K since we know that he won't be able to put down a Fossa. And then we're going to go ahead and chump block with our last killer. So now we have a 6 and an 8, and we can swing 12 2 times. So it's looking fairly decent for us. It's going to come down to how many 2Ks he has in hand. Let's go ahead and attack with our Law first, seeing if we can get a good card out of his hand. He's going to give us a 2K, and now we're going to attack once again with our Eustace Captain Kidd. Considering he's only used one event and he's not playing the Strawbeard variant, it's very likely that he has a dead event in hand, and in that case, I think that we're probably going to close this one out. And he goes ahead and takes that one, which is going to be really good for us. So here, we're going to go ahead and attach 7 to our leader. I think that was a misstep by him. I think if he had 3K counter in his hand, he should have definitely blocked that attack, because now we're attacking for 12 2 times. So that was a very close game. We're going to go ahead and hop into the second game for you guys. He probably could have blocked my second attack on my kid with those counters and it would have been better, but looking at the strength of his hand, I think we were going to be able to push through for that last damage anyway. But as you can see, if you're willing to take risks, there's a decent chance that you can beat the Newgate player, even whenever they have the 9-cost Newgate, which was the only reason he was able to survive there. So he's going to go ahead and go first here. I think him going first is probably a little bit better for us because he's seeing one less card. I'm going to go ahead and mulligan to see if we can find a Law blocker, and we end up finding 2 Law blockers, which is going to be really good for us. Now, if we find a value engine in the life, we have a really good chance at winning this game. So he's going to go ahead and start off with the Whitebeard Pirates, finding him the Porgus Diaz, a really good card to have against our strategy. I think here I want to just go ahead and play down my Apu. And the reason being is that if we play down our Momonosuke, it's a better card for him to destroy with his Marco, since he's going to be able to put that out before we get to put out our Law. And he does have the turn 2 Fossa, which is pretty good. We're going to go ahead and take this one. We get the Punk Gibson here. I think we will use the trigger to tap his Fossa, since we can go ahead and kill that. If he does attack our Apu, that's actually probably better for us because we can't mitigate his damage that he's hitting us for 7 or 8 without investing too many resources. I kind of just want to play down my Cat Viper and then attach 1 to leader and then try to challenge his Fossa with our Scratchman. He's going to go ahead and let that die, and we're going to go ahead and demand 1 card starting on turn 2. I can't say enough how important it is to start attacking for 6 as early as you can, even if it's going to give up value on the board, just because the earlier we can attack, the more cards we're demanding from our opponent's hand. And since we need to try to rush down our opponent, that is very important. And we actually get a 2K out of his hand, which is really good for us. Since we're going to be taking this damage next turn, there is some merit to us playing down the Momo plus the Scratchman. That way we can use our Law to guarantee returning one of our cards to hand to play down our Cat Viper. I think that's a little bit better than just playing the Cat Viper, because depending on what we draw, like if we get a Rhizo, we might not want to put this down yet. It is a little bit risky that we just put 2 2Ks on the board and we only have 8 in the deck, but I feel like there's a considerable chance that he plays down his Marco, killing one of our guys, and then he attacks the other, which he is going to do. And in this situation, I get rewarded because now I actually have something worth returning to hand in order to play down our Cat Viper, and then we can go ahead and attack for 6 once again, which we will do. So let's go ahead and attack for 6 here. And man, this matchup feels a lot better when the guy doesn't have Edward Newgate on curve. We'll go ahead and use the effect of our Law, playing down our Cat Viper for a good exchange of value. Now, Cat Viper is a really good card in your red matchups because the Marco isn't going to be able to touch it without a modifier, and if he's using a 2k in order to kill our blocker, that's really good for us because he was going to need that 2k to mitigate a damage anyway. So he's going to go ahead and put down the Ezo Searcher, finding the Whitebeard Pirates event. That's pretty good for us because if he's slowing down the game by playing 2 Searchers, he's not going to be able to develop as many characters, and we want to be able to establish a better board presence than our opponent so that we are able to start attacking with our Law blockers as soon as possible. He's going to attack us for 6. Since I don't have a 1k, I'm going to go ahead and take this. And when he attacks for 7, I probably just take it 2 because I kind of want this Ezo to tap down his blocker Marco later in the game. Ooh, and we do find the Krieg. Now that could be very relevant in order to pop his Marco and his Ezo if he has something like a Makino on the following turn. We do pick up another blocker Law, which I think is really good for us. Now, since we need to answer his Marco anyway, I'm tempted to just use our Law to bounce something back to hand and then put out our Ezo resting it because it's easier to attack without investing as many resources. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, bouncing back our Momo, playing down our Ezo, resting his Marco. Here, what I think I want to do is go ahead and attack his Marco for 5, and assuming he's going to revive this, I'll just attach 1 to my Cat Viper, swing it at it again, demanding another card from him, and then we'll have 1 left to play down our Capone Gang Beige. Assuming he doesn't have another Marco, we're going to be in a really good position. Man, having only 1 blocker Marco is really good for our deck. Considering he can play Ace on the following turn, I don't think I want to attack with my Trafalgar Laws. That's one of the only times that you don't want to attack with your Laws is because the guy could put down his Ace. And he does have the Edward Newgate once again, very unfortunate for us. He's going to go ahead and take out our Cat Viper, nothing we can do about that. And then he's going to go ahead and attack us for 8. Considering that we do not have a guaranteed second blocker here, I'm very tempted to just block with Capone Gang Beige because he could kill that on the following turn with his Newgate. We do end up drawing the Eustace Captain Kidd here. Not sure if it's worth playing just because the Ace hard punishes us from attacking, but it is a big body that we can do stuff with. Honestly, I kind of just want to use our Law to reset our Ezo so that we can start attacking that Marco again. I'm going to go ahead and put down the Momo and use the effect because there is a chance here we get another Ezo, which would be really good for us. So we end up only revealing a 1k counter. Very unfortunate, but I do think it was still worth it because the reward was very high and we aren't doing anything else with this. I'm going to go ahead and use the effect, returning Ezo to hand and then playing it once more, resting his Marco. And let's go ahead and attack his Marco for 5. And if we want to restand this, we can just discard our Krieg. This is looking to be another very close game, but considering we have 3 Trafalgar Law, I'm feeling pretty good about this unless our opponent has a very lucky Rad Beam. So he's going to go ahead and give us another 2k, which is really good. I'm going to discard the Krieg. We're going to re-attack his Marco. Always make sure to really think through your turns because if you do one mistake in this matchup, you're pretty much automatically losing. It's very tempting to attack with our Law, but if we do so, we might risk our opponent lethaling us next turn. I'm not sure if we can afford to do that. He's going to have 3 hits he'll be able to get through with. If we kill this, then we can take 2 damage and we can block 1 with our Law. It's pretty risky, but this is demanding a card. And considering this is always a blocker, I think I'm going to go ahead and risk it. We'll go ahead and attack it again with our Law. Like I said, this is very risky, but we're setting ourselves up to where if we survive next turn, we have a very good chance of going for game by doing this. Now, if he decides to don up his Ezo, we could use our 1k to stop that. And if we do end up getting a Punk Gibson into life, we're looking very safe. It was very good for us that he ended up letting the Marco die, because that's one less character we'll be able to attack with, and now we only need to be able to block one attack here. Now there is a chance that he tries to play for board, which would be the best option for us. I'm not saying what I did last turn was absolutely correct. It was very risky attacking with both laws, but I think in this matchup, you do have to take risks if you're going to want to win. He's going to go ahead and swing 7. I think here we do have to block this, because if we don't, he's going to hit for 2 high numbers for us to counter out. And if our life is no counter, we pretty much just auto lose. So let's hope he does not have an ace here, because I think that extra attack would pretty much guarantee him the game. As long as we survive one turn and get to keep both of our laws, I'm feeling pretty good about this. Him attacking for 6 really sucks. I'm thinking that he might have an ace, but we do end up getting the 2k, so if he dawns up his Ezo, we're looking pretty good. And he does have the ace, very unfortunate for us. He's going to be able to kill our law on attack, and he misplays terribly. If he would have attacked with his Edward Newgate, he kills our law on attack, guarantees the hit, and assuming we don't draw a counter in life, we automatically lose. Whoops. Now, if we do get a counter out of life, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, so... Okay, so we had a 2k in the life, so we would have been able to protect from his ace attack, so that misplay did not matter at all. Either way, we were getting back to our turn with one law blocker available. So it doesn't look like his hand was very good, so we're going to have to go to a third game. This game, he's going to go ahead and go first. We do have a value engine and a law blocker, so I'm inclined to keep this one. Especially the Raizo is very valuable in this matchup. And he's giving us something that we can attack with our Raizo right away, which is very good. I'm going to go ahead and start us off by playing the killer blocker and passing it back to Whitebeard. He's going to start off by attacking us for 5. I think here I just discard the Momonosuke. I want to block early because I know I'm not going to be able to block late, and we're always taking the second attack. Probably a pretty good play by him to go ahead and dawn up his Ezo and attack, considering that we were going to be able to tap it with our Cat Viper this turn anyway. I'm always playing my Raizo, and I'm just going to go ahead and attack his leader for 6. I think we do use the killer here to challenge his Ezo, because ultimately, if he has the Marco, which they usually do, he's going to be able to kill it anyway. Unfortunately, his Ezo did reveal an Edward Newgate, which is not what we were hoping for, but we are going to be able to attack this turn for 6. In my opinion, I do think that this all Whitebeard Pirates build is the better build over the Strawbeard variant, because you're able to get away with playing 4 copies of the Whitebeard Searcher event, and that just gives you so much of a higher chance to see your Marco on curve, and as well find your Edward Newgate, which is very integral to this matchup. He's going to go ahead and hit his for 6. We don't have a 2k we want to toss here, so we'll go ahead and take that. We end up getting the Punk Gibson. I don't know that I really want to use the Punk Gibson here, because if we attack his Marco, it's just the same as attacking his leader, and that's just us wasting a card. I think this turn I'm willing to forego attacking with our leader in order to drop down a second Raizo. So we'll go ahead and drop down our law using the effect, bouncing Momonosuke, playing down another Raizo, and we'll pass turn. Our opponent is 7 Dawn, so he is now within Porcus D ace range, which he does choose to do so. He's going to go ahead and hit for 6. Hopefully we find a 2k here, and we find another no counter. Very unfortunate. I think this one I have to use our Momo and our Cat Viper because our hand is very low on counter, and then we take this one for sure. So here we have a couple of options. Number one, we could just drop down the kid and hope we don't die, and hopefully we get rewarded because he's dropping down his Newgate next turn. But I think that's actually just terrible because our hand is so low on counter that I feel very inclined to go ahead and dawn up both of our Raizos and start challenging his leader or his Marco. I think I'm going to go ahead and use my Bonnie, because if we find a blocker here, we're looking very good. We end up failing Search, which was very unlikely. We had about a 90% chance to hit with that Search, so that's very unfortunate for us. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start off by attaching 2 to Raizo, attacking his Marco here. Hopefully we get a defensive event out of his hand. And we do find the Capone Gang Beige, which was actually the only thing that worked with the amount of Dawn we had remaining, so that's actually pretty good for us. Would have liked to seen him get rid of a defensive event, but a card is a card. Let's go ahead and attack his Marco once more. At least we got another card with counter, which is decent for us. Since I'm going to be playing the beige anyway, I might as well just don up my leader. I'm not feeling too good about this game since we haven't seen that many blockers, and he's dropping down the new gate. I think he might get us here, but like I said, this isn't the best matchup. The only reason I'm showing this gameplay is to demonstrate to you that it is winnable. We can chump block his leader, and then his Marco we can block with 2 1Ks, so we'll always take that one. Let's go ahead and get rid of our Cat Viper, and let's get rid of our Rhizo. It's a little too late to use him. Now, by leaving us with these Rhizos, it gives us a good chance to clear the board, and if we draw enough blockers, we will be able to stabilize. Considering we have the Bonnie, I'm feeling decent about this situation. It's ultimately going to come down to how many events does our opponent have in hand, and how many blockers can we draw. If we get a 5-cost Law here, I think that would be really good. So we do end up getting the 5-cost Law, which is pretty good for us. Let's go ahead and attach 2 to our Rhizo, swing at his Marco. Ooh, and we get a 2K. That's going to be really good. I'm actually surprised how close these games have ended up being with our opponent having the 9-beard on curve every single time. So if we play our Law for 5, and then we bounce back our Bonnie to play out our killer, he can just kill that with his Whitebeard anyway. But the Law is going to stop him from just reducing one of our Laws with an ace and then just killing both of our blockers. So I think it's probably better to do so anyway. Now the question is, do we use our Rhizo to draw a card, or do we attack with our leader? If we attack with our leader, we have 1 Dawn floating, and that's only really relevant if we try to Dawn up our Law here, which we can't really afford to do so since our opponent is threatening lethal next turn. We really just have to attack with our Rhizo and hope that we draw a card with counter and just see what happens, because this is not looking very good for us. And we end up drawing a third 8-cost, which is really, really bad. I don't think we're going to be able to clutch this, but we'll just see how much gas our opponent has. I'm going to go ahead and end the turn by dropping down our Trafalgar Law, bouncing back the Bonnie, and playing down a killer. So now we essentially have 2 blockers. Our opponent has 4 attacks. We need to be able to block 2 attacks, and we have a total of 4K counter in hand. It was just terrible. Our opponent has the ace, even worse for us. Now he's threatening for 5 attacks. It's looking like he's going to have confirmed lethal, but it was still very close. Our opponent just had the nuts, and you can't win every game. Like I said, the point of this was to demonstrate that this is a winnable matchup, even though it's not the most favorable. So that is his highest attack guy. We always block with this. I'm not even sure if we were to survive this turn that we could kill him next turn. So can we block a 6 and a 7? If we block this with a 2 and a 1, then we literally have 1K counter. He's going to go ahead and attack with his ace. We use a 2 and a 1, and then we have 1K counter in a total of 6 cards. And our opponent decides to attack our Rhizo for no reason. Okay, he just gave us another turn. He must be very confident about the cards he has in hand. It's probably still going to end in him winning the match, but we might as well just throw our cards out there. You know, one thing that you got to understand about One Piece is even though it looked like an unwinnable situation, our opponent didn't know that we had no counter in hand. And to be fair, in his part, if we did have more than 1 counter in hand, we were probably going to be able to survive. So I understand why he would play it safe, but me personally knowing that the kid deck does not have a bunch of 2Ks and that it has a lot of cards with no counter, I would probably just risk it, especially since he was able to create a 5th attack for himself. But let's go ahead and attack for 12 and just see if he has it. Most likely, if he has an event counter, he's probably going to steal this one from us, but it was a close one regardless. And he does have the Radical Beam, so that's going to be GG. But as you can tell, it was a very close match, and that is what I was here to demonstrate for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you think this is a viable deck, make sure to go try it out and tell me how you feel about it. Let me know if you end up getting good results with this, because like I said, if I was able to go to another event in the future, I would definitely like to try my luck, because I think across the board, this is a very strong deck, and it has a lot of outplay potential, as you saw. Every single move matters, and I may have done something wrong. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if it's not the goo, it's got to go. Peace.
Ooh, is that indigo?